Hello and welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here to take some pretty complex history, some really dense research, and pull out the most important, the most surprising insights for you.
And today, we are tackling a topic that everyone thinks they know, the Islamic Golden Age.
Right, but we are going at it with a completely different mission.
Exactly. For centuries, the focus has been on the results. The incredible science, the philosophy, the algebra, the medicine. And that's all true. But we're setting aside the what and asking the much harder question.
Which is why.
Why? What were the exact specific political, economic, and cultural preconditions that had to line up just right to allow this global explosion of science to happen? What did they get right?
And our mission today is, well, it's pretty ambitious. We are going to frame the Islamic Golden Age not as some standalone miraculous event.
No, not at all.
But as the essential, continuous, fourth great chapter in a 6,500-year story of what we call Western civilization.
And I'll be the first to admit, that definition it's unorthodox. For a lot of people listening, the idea of integrating the history of Baghdad and Cordoba firmly into the same narrative thread that includes, say, Egypt and Greece and Rome, that's a challenge.
Geographically and culturally, sure.
Right. But the sources we're diving into today make a powerful argument that if you don't see it that way, you miss the single most important part of the story.
The unbroken thread.
The unbroken thread of knowledge transfer. This age wasn't a historical anomaly. It was the heir to a massive intellectual inheritance.
So before we really jump in, here's a little preview of the central, and maybe for some, a controversial argument for the source material.
That's a big one.
Right, it is. The argument is that the brilliance of the Islamic Golden Age was not primarily a religious achievement. The evidence, when you look at it, suggests that both Christianity and Islam throughout history have shown themselves perfectly capable of producing either these profoundly innovative open societies or profoundly restrictive backwards ones.
The determining factor, then, isn't the faith itself.
Not at all. It was the external stuff, the political systems they put in place, the economic incentives, the degree of institutional tolerance. That's what made the difference.
So it forces you to move past the simple labels and look at the actual policy decisions. Who had the power? Where did they decide to build the capital? How did they handle something as fundamental as private property?
And critically, what knowledge did they choose to preserve and fund?
That's where the real history is. And that's where the lessons for us today really lie.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with this unconventional timeline, this 6,500-year story. Before we can even get to the fourth age, we need to quickly lay out the first three.
Right. We have to understand what intellectual and political foundations the Golden Age inherited.
Because traditional history, the kind most of us learned, it creates this huge artificial gap, doesn't it?
A massive one. I mean, they correctly identify ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia as, the founders of civilization, the original intellectual engine. But then they often treat them as like a footnote before they rush off to Athens and Rome, and you completely miss the continuity.
And that jump, that skipping over millennia, it creates this deep geographical binary. We're basically asked to accept that Greece is somehow culturally separate from the land right next to it.
From Turkey, the Levant, Mesopotamia.
Yeah, which is just, it's ridiculous when you actually look at the shared culture.
It really is. If you put a modern Greek, a Turk, and an Iranian in a room together, the shared affinity for certain foods, for certain music, certain instruments, even certain kinds of alcohol, it speaks to thousands of years of deep integrated cultural exchange.
It leads to this really illogical conclusion that Iraq, the very region that invented writing, that founded the first large cities, that created the first true government.
The cradle of civilization, literally.
Exactly. That it somehow just ceased to be part of the civilization it founded just because the center of power shifted temporarily to Rome.
It makes no sense. The sources argue, and I think really compellingly, that the region simply became the eastern part of the West, not some separate, unified Eastern civilization.
And that's a really important distinction to make, because this idea of a single, monolithic Eastern civilization is also pretty flawed.
Deeply flawed. India and China are ancient, rich, world-changing civilizations, absolutely. But they are distinct. They are separate rivers of history from the continuous narrative thread that we can trace from Sumer through Rome and then into Baghdad.
And yet they're all interacting, which is what makes this so fascinating. You can't draw these neat, clean lines.
You really can't. There's one point in the research that It really stands out, and it's about how early global trade was really functioning.
Oh, this is the pasta story.
This is the pasta story. The source material details that pasta, a food we associate entirely with Italy, it originated in China.
And it wasn't brought over by Marco Polo.
Not even close. It was brought to Sicily and Italy centuries earlier, in the 8th and 9th centuries, by Arab traders who were just traversing these vast distances. So that mixing of goods, of ideas, that's the real engine here.
Okay, so let's lay out these three foundational ages. The intellectual capital that eventually gets pooled in Persia. Where does it all start?
It starts with age 1. The
Correct.
foundation. This is the age of invention and organization, beginning roughly 6,500 years ago. And the crucial innovation here isn't a pyramid or a wall.
It's a concept.
It's a political concept, government.
I want to stop on that definition for a second because the source offers a really profound political science view on this. What makes the government created by ancient prehistoric Egypt different from just, say, a chieftain or a powerful tribe?
It's the idea of a self-replicating institution. I mean, think about it. A chief can enforce a law, sure, but when they die, the law often dies right along with them.
Right, it's tied to the person.
It's tied to the person. A government, as it's defined here, is an institution created with a specific internal goal to change societal norms or economic behavior or political outcomes. And crucially, it's designed to outlive its founder. Ancient Egypt figured this out 6,500 years ago. They created the world's first truly resilient, self-perpetuating system.
And then came the technology to actually scale that system.
Exactly. About 5,400 years ago, you have the Sumerians inventing writing, which allows for complex institutional memory, for detailed laws to be transferred over time and distance. And then shortly after that, 5,100 years ago, Egypt builds the first large state by conquering itself.
Upper Egypt absorbing Lower Egypt.
Right, consolidating power.
And what's often overlooked about this first age is just how sophisticated the society became alongside the politics.
Oh, absolutely. The sources highlight some remarkable advancements in, well, what we would call human rights. The existence of named female doctors, women like Merita and Pisachet, that tells you something critical about social development.
That professional knowledge was valued regardless of gender.
It was. And that's a tradition that tragically came to an abrupt end with this devastating 170-year civil war that just plunged the Old Kingdom into chaos.
Which brings us to the rebound. Age 2. Economic convenience and empire. This kicks off around 3,550 years ago, driven by Egypt's 18th dynasty.
And the intellectual leap here wasn't structural like government. It was social. It was the discovery of convenience driven by economic surplus.
It's a powerful concept because it's so relatable.
It is. Society finally became wealthy enough, organized enough, that not everyone had to be farming or fighting all the time. This surplus allowed for the specialization of services that just solved everyday problems.
What kind of services are we talking about? Because, you imagine antiquity as this constant grinding poverty.
And for many it was, but for the growing urban classes, the sources detail things like laundry service. You didn't have to spend your whole day beating clothes on rocks anymore. Someone else could be paid to handle it.
The ancient equivalent of grocery delivery.
Literally. Providing a list and having specialized workers procure and deliver the goods. When you read the letters and the poetry from this era, from the 18th dynasty, it shows that they were literally the same people we are today.
Complaining about the same thing.
Complaining about the same things. You find letters where soldiers are griping about basic training, hating their drill instructors, wanting to go home. It shows this highly developed, specialized society that had built an empire stretching all the way into Palestine and Syria, but where the basic human anxieties were identical to ours.
Okay, so that brings us to the final, and really the crucial precursor to the Golden Age. Age 3. Diversity and conquest. This starts about 2,600 years ago.
And it's kicked off by one man, Cyrus the Great Kurash of Persia.
And his policies are what establish the cultural preference that basically saves the ancient world's knowledge.
He's the historical figure. He built this empire that introduced what many historians consider the world's first Bill of Rights. He was the first great conqueror who didn't demand assimilation from the conquered.
He celebrated diversity instead.
He celebrated it. And the most important part of that celebration was his approach to religion. It wasn't just tolerated. That's the key.
It was state-funded.
State-funded. Cyrus proclaimed that other religions were legal, they were encouraged, and most importantly, they were an asset the state would actually invest in. So if a Jewish synagogue or a Mesopotamian temple was falling apart, the Persian state fixed it.
That establishes a political tradition, a high-level preference for integrating and supporting diverse knowledge, not just destroying it.
Which is profoundly different from what came next, because this age also includes the explosion of Greek philosophy and ultimately Roman conquest. And Rome operated on a fundamentally different principle than Cyrus.
The Roman method was effective, but brutal.
Utterly brutal. I mean, we have to remember that while they built these magnificent aqueducts and roads, they dedicated those same architectural wonders to acts of pure destruction.
Like Trajan's Tower.
Exactly. The sources note that Trajan's Tower wasn't built to celebrate peace or prosperity. It is a massive, beautiful, spiraling depiction of the defeat, the mass enslavement, and the execution of the Dacians. The Roman approach was conquest, forced assimilation, and the obliteration of any knowledge that dissented.
So that third age, with the Greek intellectual high point and the massive Roman Empire, it eventually collapses. And this collapse provides the immediate, necessary context for the rise of the Islamic Golden Age. The transition was, well, it was marked by intellectual suicide.
The Roman Empire wasn't just vanquished in a single battle, it was rotting from the inside for centuries. The sources really point to the beginning of the crisis of the 3rd century AD as the start of the end.
So let's contextualize that crisis. I mean, what does deep trouble actually look like on the ground for people?
It was a perfect storm. You're talking about political chaos, military strain, economic disaster.
Hyperinflation.
Hyperinflation, where the value of money just collapsed entirely. You're talking about legions scattered across this massive border, and they're increasingly reliant on mercenary armies who have absolutely no loyalty to Rome itself. The sources note how emperors came and went in rapid succession, often just murdered by their own guards.
And this internal weakness, it allowed for these huge fractures in the empire.
Massive fractures. You have Zenobia of Palmyra, a Syrian woman from Homs, who sees the opportunity and just carves out her own empire. She seizes crucial Roman provinces, including the eastern half of Turkey, Syria, Palestine, Jordan, and all of Egypt.
And she holds it for 4 years.
4 years. That was the ultimate structural failure. Diocletian, he eventually put the political pieces back together, but the integrity of the legions and the economy was just permanently weakened.
So Constantine later tries to stabilize this crumbling state by legalizing Christianity, using it as a state tool for unity.
And moving the capital to Byzantium. But the fundamental instability was still there.
And here we have the true inflection point. The moment where the Roman tradition explicitly turns against that age 3 tradition of diversity we just talked about.
Yes. In 391 AD, Emperor Theodosius I declares Christianity the only legal religion in the empire. And with that, he overturns centuries of, well, relative tolerance for Judaism and paganism.
And the destruction was immediate.
It was immediate and systematic. The Archbishop of Alexandria at the time, a man named Theophilus I, he used this new legal mandate to consolidate his own power. He incited a mob that first attacked the Jewish sector, then went after pagan shrines, and finally,
they targeted the most sacred institution of learning in the entire Western world.
the Great Library.
And that mob set it on fire. Millennia of accumulated human knowledge just gone. The sources emphasize that none of the original scrolls from that library survived.
And the tragedy just continued. The final director of the Great Library was the world-famous female philosopher and mathematician, Hypatia.
She survived the initial fire.
She did. She worked for another 2 decades as this renowned teacher and intellectual leader, but she was seen as a threat to this new, burgeoning religious political power structure.
Her end is just this horrifying symbol of the Roman Empire's intellectual decline.
It really is. Archbishop Cyril, who was Theophilus' successor, he orchestrated her public murder. She was dragged into the street, killed with oyster shells. I mean, a brutally symbolic act of public savagery.
And then her remains, along with the book she'd managed to save, were burned.
And this is so critical for our narrative. Hypatia and her students, they did manage to save copies, yes, but only in the thousands. The library was estimated to hold up to 500,000 documents. So the Roman Empire, the supposed heir to Greece, consciously chose intolerance and destruction, and in doing so, it created this profound, dark, intellectual vacuum across the European continent.
So on one side, you have Rome destroying its own intellectual past, and on the other, the foundation for the next great age, the Islamic Golden Age, is being laid centuries before Islam even existed by Rome's perennial enemy.
The Sasanian Persians.
This is where the story gets really interesting. It shows how history can turn on the policies of just a single, highly ambitious person. In this case, Shapur I.
The second Sasanian emperor. Shapur engaged in these fierce strategic wars with the decaying Roman Empire in the mid-3rd century.
And that conflict reached this unbelievable peak in 260 AD.
The humiliation of Rome at the Battle of Edessa was just absolute. The Roman Emperor Valerian was captured. He's the only Roman emperor in history to be captured by an enemy commander.
And not just him.
Not just him. 2 entire intact Roman legions. It was the single most disastrous military rout Rome ever faced.
And Shapur's treatment of the captured Romans is what really matters for our deep dive.
Yeah.
He didn't just execute them. He saw strategic value. He wanted their skills.
Specifically, the sources say he recognized the Roman legionnaires as invaluable engineers.
Wait, what engineers? What did the Romans have that the powerful Persians lacked?
Well, the sources suggest it was a specialization in certain types of infrastructure, Roman-style architecture, advanced hydraulics for cities. Shapur forced these captured legions to build 2 brand-new Roman-style cities, Bishapur and Gandhi Shapur.
So this was a deliberate act of cultural and technological poaching.
Completely deliberate. And the ultimate display of psychological warfare was his treatment of Emperor Valerian himself. Shapur built a miniature palace for Valerian in Gandhi Shapur, where the former emperor lived with the captured Roman legionnaires, who were now Persian citizens, as his staff.
But this wasn't kindness.
Oh no, this was pure spectacle. Shapur built a trail in the surrounding hills, put up ticket booths, and turned the captured Roman city and its captured emperor into a public zoo for viewing.
That's unbelievable.
The message was crystal clear. Roman power is now a curiosity, a thing to be looked at, managed by Persian strength. It speaks to the deliberate cultural and political plunder Shapur was executing.
He wasn't just interested in territory, he was interested in human capital.
Exactly. He stole Roman citizens, especially intellectuals and skilled laborers from Syria and Palestine, brought them back to Persia, gave them citizenship, and integrated them. He was consciously enriching his empire with Rome's expertise.
But the real foundation for the Golden Age was his envy of Roman intellectual institutions. He saw the Great Library, the University of Alexandria, and he wanted a Persian equivalent.
So he built the academy at Gandhi Shapur, and this institution became the single most critical intellectual lifeboat for Western civilization. Over the next 3 centuries, as the Byzantine Empire became more and more intolerant, scholars and their priceless manuscripts fled east.
Okay, let's trace that flight. In 489 AD, the Emperor Zeno shuts down the academy in Edessa, a major center of learning. Where do those scholars go?
Straight to Gandhi Shapur. They were welcomed with open arms, integrated under the Sasanian umbrella, and then the truly decisive moment comes in 529 AD.
Centuries before the Arab conquests.
Right. The Emperor Justinian I, seeking to solidify Christian uniformity, shuts down the revered Academy of Athens, the last stronghold of classical Greek learning.
That must have been an incredible treasure trove. What exactly were those Athenian scholars carrying with them?
They were carrying the foundational texts, the primary works of Aristotle, Plato, the later Neoplatonists, crucial texts in geometry by Euclid, the advanced astronomy of Ptolemy. These were the very works Rome had either destroyed or just ignored. But the Persians, under Khusrau I, welcomed the scholars and put these Greek works safely into the repository at Gandhi Shapur.
So Gandhi Shapur becomes this unparalleled intellectual bunker. It's holding Egyptian, Roman, and Greek material that fled intolerance. Plus, the Persians had been actively collecting material from India and China since it was founded.
It was unique. While the quantity of books, it only reached about 1/10 the size of Alexandria's destroyed collection, the quality and the diversity were unmatched. Crucially, it housed the very knowledge that the Roman Byzantine tradition had consciously tried to wipe out. This repository, built by a jealous Persian emperor using captured Roman engineers, is the true engine room of the future Golden Age.
Okay, so we fast forward now to the 7th century. The Arab expansion explodes out of the Arabian Peninsula, conquering both the Sasanian Persian Empire and huge parts of the Byzantine Roman Empire. And the decisive factor for our story is how this new young empire treated the structures it absorbed.
The speed was just staggering. By 638 AD, the Arabs capture Gandhi Shapur. And you have to understand, they were a successful conquering force, but they were politically nascent.
And when conquerors find a strange building full of scrolls in foreign languages, the instinct is often to burn it.
As happened tragically in Alexandria. But the sources indicate the Arabs did the exact opposite. They approached the academy with humility.
Intense humility and curiosity.
Yes. They essentially went to the defeated Persians and asked, "What is this place? Show us around." And when the Persians explained that this was a place of learning, of science, of research, a collection of the world's knowledge, The Arab conquerors recognized its value.
So they didn't burn it, they didn't pillage it.
They just left it alone. They allowed the scholars to keep working. This respect for an established intellectual institution was a key difference from the Roman example.
By 711 AD, the empire stretches from Spain and Portugal all the way to Pakistan. And they've got this massive logistical problem. They have the land, but their state structure is barely a generation old.
So they made a very practical decision. They just chose to keep the existing, highly developed bureaucracies intact. And this created two competing, massive administrative systems under a single Arab Muslim ruling class.
The historical tension embedded in that decision is just fascinating.
It's incredible. The eastern half of the empire was run by the deep-rooted Persian bureaucracy, with this continuous institutional memory stretching back centuries.
In the western half.
Run by the Roman bureaucracy in provinces like Syria and Egypt. And here is the profound twist. The vast majority of the people running the government, the tax collectors, the judges, the trade administrators, they were not Muslim. The empire was initially 60% Christian, plus large Zoroastrian and Buddhist populations in the east.
So if you're the Arab caliph sitting in Damascus, you have two sets of administrators who are already enemies, competing to advise you on how to run your new empire.
And not just enemies. They had been fighting each other for almost 700 straight years, from the Roman-Parthian Wars all the way through the Byzantine-Sasanian conflicts. That deep-seated institutional hatred didn't just vanish because a new caliph was in charge.
So I understand the tracing of the knowledge, but for the average listener, that cultural leap from Rome to Baghdad is huge. How do we justify calling this whole thing Western when the political focus shifts so far east?
That's an excellent challenge, and it comes down to methodology. We're defining Western not by modern geography, but by that continuous transfer of knowledge that originated in what we call the West Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece. The civilization follows its own institutions, and the sources argue that the conflicts that followed prove this cultural inheritance.
You're talking about the fitness, the civil wars.
Yes. From a political science perspective, the fitnas were fundamentally struggles over the direction of the empire, Roman versus Persian.
The first one, for example.
The first fitna saw Muawiyah, who was based in Roman Syria, defeat Ali, who was based in Persian Iraq. Muawiyah won, and so the Umayyads pointed the state toward the Roman or Western military and administrative tradition.
But that pendulum eventually swung back.
It did. The ultimate decisive hinge came with the Abbasid Revolution, which started in Khorasan in the east and defeated the Umayyads in 750 AD. This was the true political unlocking of the Golden Age.
The Abbasids moved the capital.
They founded Baghdad, a name that came from a Persian village, even though the official name was Medina as-Salam, the city of peace. And crucially, this revolution installed the Persian bureaucracy on top. It relegated the Roman bureaucracy to the provinces. This reversed the entire focus of the empire, shifting political preference away from the Roman tradition of intolerance and conquest, back toward the Persian tradition of tolerance and learning that dated all the way back to Cyrus the Great.
So we had the Abbasid Caliphate, centered in Baghdad, explicitly favoring this Persian tradition of scholarship. They now control the critical repository of knowledge at Gandhi Shapur, which has all this Greek and Roman knowledge that the West had destroyed. The political revolution has essentially unlocked centuries of preserved knowledge. How quickly did the innovation follow? Was it overnight?
It was incredibly fast, often within one generation of the Abbasid shift, because the first necessary step was economic. The Abbasids looked at the inherited Roman and Persian systems land held by nobles, worked by peasants, and deemed them archaic, inefficient.
They removed the nobles.
They removed the nobles and deeded the land directly to the farmers.
They established widespread private property.
Exactly. And this is a massive, immediate economic incentive shift. The farmer is no longer working for a noble. They're working for their own profit. Every surplus, every efficiency gain, it benefits them directly.
Which creates the Arab agricultural revolution.
Yeah.
It's not about finding one new crop. It's about efficiency and innovation born from self-interest.
Precisely. You see immediate, massive results. Farmers start experimenting with sophisticated crop rotation. They invest in building complex water wheels and mills to reduce labor. They actively search for alternative cash crops to maximize their profit. And in doing so, they fundamentally change global commerce.
Can you give some concrete examples of that economic creativity?
Well, the sources detail how they searched far and wide. This search for new cash crops led them to Ethiopia, where they discovered the coffee bean. They successfully transplanted and cultivated it in Mocha, Yemen, and created the entire global kawa, or coffee industry, from scratch.
Wow.
They also mastered technologies like packing ice onto ships using specialized insulation, so they could sell fresh, perishable food and high-value fruit in distant markets like India, completely transforming long-distance trade.
And while this economic engine is roaring, the intellectual engine is starting up. The Abbasid interest in funding learning drives scholars directly to Gandhi-Shapur.
And the final merger happens in 832 AD, when the Caliph al-Ma'mun orders the books from Gandhi-Shapur moved to the newly established House of Wisdom in Baghdad.
That move unified the money, the political will, and the preserved knowledge base.
And the scholars who emerged from that environment changed the world.
Let's start with Al-Kindi. He was central to that whole translation movement.
Al-Kindi began this monumental project of translating Greek philosophy, Aristotle, Plato, into Arabic. And this wasn't just a simple word-for-word conversion. Arabic, as a language of science, it lacked the vocabulary for many Greek concepts. So Al-Kindi and his colleagues had to invent new terminology, essentially building the modern lexicon of science as they went.
Then you have Al-Khwarizmi, a Persian, who synthesizes knowledge from the Indian tradition, specifically their numerical system.
Al-Khwarizmi is just foundational. He didn't just invent algebra. He created a mathematical system that could solve specific, practical problems like calculating inheritance shares or engineering structures using a general, systematic method.
A radical break from the geometric approach of the Greeks.
Completely. And the term algorithm, which defines our entire modern computing age, is literally a Latinized mispronunciation of his name, Al-Khwarizmi. It just shows the sheer scale of his legacy.
And here's where the scientific leaps become truly astounding. Let's talk about Ibn al-Haytham, or Al-Hasan, who wrote the Book of Optics in 1021 AD.
Al-Hasan is arguably the inventor of the true scientific method. Before him, the established Greek view, coming from Ptolemy and Euclid, was that vision worked by the eye sending out rays to perceive objects.
And Al-Hasan challenged this through empirical, repeatable experimentation. He didn't just theorize.
He built instruments to test his ideas. He built the world's first camera obscura, a pinhole camera. By observing light moving into a darkened room, he proved empirically that light traveled in straight lines and entered the eye, rather than rays leaving the eye. That move from passive observation to active, repeatable proof is the birth of modern scientific inquiry.
But his theories went way beyond just optics. The sources claim he was doing calculus and contemplating forces we associate with a much more modern era.
His work suggests this profound understanding of physics. He theorized that all objects in the universe exerted a force on each other, what we call gravity. He hypothesized that light had a finite speed and traveled in waves, and there's evidence that suggests he developed mathematical methods equivalent to calculus 600 years before Newton. A lot of his work is lost, but what survives shows a mind that defined the next half-millennium of scientific thought.
And just as revolutionary was Avicenna, or Ibn Sina, writing the Canon of Medicine in 1025, a book that became the standard medical textbook globally for 5 centuries.
And Avicenna was operating not just on a terrestrial level, but on a cosmic one. He was trying to reconcile the philosophy he inherited with his medical and scientific observations.
And one of those principles sounds shockingly like the Big Bang Theory.
It does. Through his philosophical analysis of information and time, he essentially described entropy. He realized that as time moves forward, the complexity and information of the universe are constantly increasing.
So if that's true.
Then if you reverse the arrow of time, all that complexity and information can't just disappear. It must collapse down. And so he described a universe that unfolded from a small little packet of information.
He looked at the flow of knowledge, the very subject of our deep dive, and applied that universally, concluding the entire cosmos started from a single compressed point.
It's an incredible intellectual leap. And the environment that allowed this firepower was paramount. The Golden Age wasn't just in Baghdad. It was in Cairo, Cordoba, Timbuktu, Bukhara, Isfahan.
And the sources really stress that this success was fundamentally due to the empire being a genuinely tolerant society.
It was a conscious choice, a direct contrast to the Roman Byzantine model. It allowed scholars, Arabs, Persians, Christians, and Jews to prosper based on their intellectual merit, not their faith or their ethnicity. This deliberate inclusion allowed for maximum intellectual cross-pollination.
And you even see this subtle and important language shift, right? where Arabic is dominant in the West.
Right, in Cairo and Cordoba. But Persian begins to dominate the scientific conversation in the East, in Bukhara and Isfahan, through Avicenna's generation. It just highlights the enduring power of that Persian cultural conversation the Abbasids had privileged.
So the Islamic Golden Age, as a single political entity, it eventually fragments. Spain breaks off early, the caliph in Baghdad becomes a puppet by the 10th century, but the knowledge, critically, it didn't vanish with the political power.
No, it was preserved and transferred, laying the groundwork for the next age.
The Renaissance.
The Renaissance. And this transfer happened through three primary routes, all centered on geographic contact with the European sphere.
Route number 1, the Reconquista in Spain. As Christian kingdoms conquered Muslim Spain, they captured these vast Arab libraries. They were basically intellectual time capsules.
They contained the works of Plato and Aristotle, Euclid, Ptolemy works the Romans had destroyed or allowed to vanish centuries earlier. And the initial reaction of the church was often, burn these works as infidel knowledge.
But what happened next is this incredible act of intellectual rebellion that really saved the day.
Dominican and Benedictine monks, instead of following orders, built giant, illegal, underground libraries across Europe. They slowly, painstakingly began translating the Arabic works back into Latin and ancient Greek. These clandestine translations of classical philosophy, advanced math from Al-Khwarizmi, medical texts from Avicenna, they were the first drips of knowledge to feed the starved intellectual life of Europe.
Okay, route number 2 was through the incredibly complex political landscape of Sicily.
Sicily is a historian's headache. It was ruled by Greeks, Romans, Germans, Arabs, and finally the Norman Vikings. And the Norman rulers, particularly Roger II, they fell completely in love with the refined Arab culture they conquered.
He wasn't just tolerant, he actually adopted the Arab administrative style.
He ran a mixed bureaucracy staffed by Jews, Muslims, and Christians. He minted coins in both Latin and Arabic. He actively funded Muslim scholarship, commissioning famous works like the Tabula Rogeriana, an extraordinary world map by Muhammad Ali Idrisi. Sicily became this living experiment in multicultural governance.
Which peaked with Frederick II, the Holy Roman Emperor, nicknamed Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world.
Frederick was a product of this culture. He spoke 6 languages, including fluent Arabic. He deeply read Arab philosophy. He commissioned translations of Arab science into Latin. He was so admired that when he negotiated with the Sultan of Egypt, the Arabs simply gifted him the title King of Jerusalem. Sicily's exposure to this culture directly helped trigger the Renaissance by providing a model for secular, inquiry-based learning.
And the third route was Venice, the merchant middleman that refused to participate in Europe's political boycotts.
Venice was unique. It prioritized commerce over ideology. They traded extensively with Muslim states to get luxury goods like silk, cotton, and pepper that were boycotted by other European kingdoms.
And that intimate relationship led to some fascinating cultural and linguistic exchange.
Oh, absolutely. The source has this wonderful anecdote. When trading, Arabs had adopted the Persian word sarvar, meaning at your service. The Venetians heard this as savo, which quickly evolved into the modern Italian greeting.
Ciao.
Ciao, which was later picked up by the Austrians and Germans as tschüss. It just shows how deeply commerce connected and transferred culture.
So when the Renaissance, the rebirth began in Europe, it was a rebirth of the ancient world, but not simply a recovery of Rome. It was the recovery of the ancient world as it had been preserved and fundamentally advanced by the Abbasid and Persian intellectual tradition.
Exactly. They had to get the preserved manuscripts from the monks in Sicily, take the revolutionary science created by Ibn al-Haytham and Avicenna, and fuse it with their own emergent thought. That combination of ancient knowledge and Golden Age science is precisely what allowed Europe to enter the Fifth Age, the age we are currently exiting.
So what does this extraordinary 6,500-year story mean for us today? The Islamic Golden Age wasn't some random historical miracle. It was the essential fourth age of civilization, a necessary link. It was born from a perfect storm.
The political will of the Abbasids favoring the Persian tradition of learning.
The implementation of massive economic incentives like private property.
And the historical luck that preserved the knowledge fleeing Byzantine intolerance at Gandhi Shapur.
The core lesson, as illuminated by these sources, is, well, it's profound. Innovation is not an inherent trait of any one culture or religious group. It's a direct result of political and social policy.
Tolerance, powerful economic drivers like private property, and a profound institutional respect for foundational knowledge and inquiry. These are the absolute prerequisites for innovation. They worked 1,000 years ago, and they're the only things that will work now.
And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you to chew on. The sources suggest that we are currently at a modern inflection point. Throughout history, every time one great age has ended, it's been followed by an intermediate dark age before the next age could begin. What are we doing now to transition into the sixth age, the age of global connectivity and existential threats, without triggering an intermediate decline?
We have to ask ourselves the scary question mark hanging over our present. What knowledge are we currently preserving? What systems of tolerance and inquiry are we actively maintaining, especially when we're facing immense collective problems like global warming? Can humanity summon the humility and open-mindedness shown by those early conquerors at Gandhi Shapur who saw value in what they did not understand to prevent a historical decline? The sources suggest the answer lies in whether we choose policy over prejudice and knowledge over dogma.
Keep asking those questions, keep digging, and keep learning. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.